You're tuned in to Tomfoolery.
All right, Tomfoolery podcast here. We got Kat Silva on today. Thanks for coming on, Kat.
Thank you for having me.
So I thought it would be a good idea to have you on, especially right now with the government shutdown and a lot of it being over immigration. And I know that you and your mother immigrated over here, and I've gotten very limited information on that. You just mentioned it once. And I'd actually like to know, because I know that you're very strongly against the immigration reform, or at least I assume you like reform, just not the wall or Trump's stances on it for the most part. So I'd like to know, what is your personal experience with immigration and how you and your mom came here? Because it was from Colombia. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that reform is absolutely necessary, just not reform in the way where you are making it harder for people to come here. My personal experience, I came here and I got political asylum. We're Colombian. My mom was a dean at a big university in Colombia. The gorilla was having some dealings with the university, and the previous dean was kind of signing off degrees and diplomas for them. And when my mom took over,
how old are you at this time?
I moved here when I was 11. I'm not exactly sure how long this went on, but she wouldn't sign off on diplomas and degrees. They had already wrecked the country. It had the longest running civil war. It was the guerrilla and paramilitary groups.
So what is the guerrilla?
The guerrilla are just a group, and they're basically actively trying to take over the country. They actually just signed a law or peace treaty with the government, so they aren't supposed to be fighting anymore. However, they took a lot of land from people, kidnapped a lot of people, all for money and political power. So my mom...
What are they fighting for exactly? Are they...
It has changed. They used to want more communist ideas. Then you got all the cartels and all the drugs involved. So it turned it more into just a power struggle.
Yeah. Okay. So go ahead.
So my mom didn't want to sign off. We had family who had all their land stolen, and my mom was not for it. Neither was my dad. So she would not sign off on the diplomas, and that was not okay with them. And it was threats of kidnappings. They started going after her. She got kidnapped. My family paid a ransom, and after the ransom, they started coming after my brother and I. So that's when my parents decided, that's it, we need to move somewhere. And my dad had family here in the United States. We knew of the asylum laws in the United States, so we came here. We got a visa and came here legally. And as soon as we got here, we applied for asylum.
So what exactly is you said diploma and what?
The diplomas that my mom was not signing off on.
Yeah, so what are these exactly?
It was just anything. They basically wanted diplomas for power. It was either for government positions where you needed, degrees for business or law, or anything from science to, just anything you could think of, certifications. It's just all a power struggle.
Okay. And that's with communism. That's always a little rough, but is Colombia not communist already?
No, not at all. They're a republic.
Okay. So that's I assume then a socialist more so, or
no, not at all. It's kind of like the United States. You have you vote people in and they represent you. They have kind of like states in America, and you vote people in to represent those places, and then they make laws. They have certain things that people would say, like their health care, for example. pay while you're working, and then you have health care. Like, you don't have to pay co-pays, you don't have to pay for surgeries, you don't have to pay for your prescription medicine, and it goes on until you retire and you're old and you die. So it's
Forgive me for my ignorance on these topics. I have not exactly uh, researched Colombia.
yeah, most people wouldn't. They just know it's cocaine, emeralds and coffee.
Well, and honestly, I probably get Colombia and Cuba mixed up sometimes in my head, and maybe that's where I'm going with the
Socialism.
sure, yeah. And so if here again, I don't know numbers on immigration. I assume you know the asylum laws. I look at and I say this seems fair. When there were all the asylum seekers coming from the Middle East, I thought they're not being outrageous here. Trump wants to make sure that there aren't any terrorists coming in, and he's not accusing all of them of being terrorists, but he wants to make sure that there aren't terrorists sneaking in with them, and just be safe. And it is a part of the law that all asylum seekers have to go through vigorous background checks and things like that to make sure that that they don't have criminal backgrounds and things like that. Even if you're a convicted felon in your country, yet you really are someone who's being oppressed by, because the law says you have to be oppressed by your race or religion or other sorts of God-given freedoms that that they would call oppression. And so, even if you are really being oppressed, you're not automatically going to get in just because of that alone. You have to actually you have to be a good citizen ahead of time. And so when they had this halt at the airports, pretty much telling everybody like, look, we're not letting y'all in. There's too many of you. We have to check and make sure that none of you have criminal backgrounds or are terrorists or are in any other sort of organizations that we would not want in the United States. I didn't think that was all that ridiculous. And as somebody who's who got asylum from the United States, I would think that you would also appreciate that system and the way that it works. No?
I absolutely agree with vetting people when they're applying for asylum. I think that's necessary, and I don't think it's outrageous to have a standard for people to come here. What I think the issue with asylum is how long it takes to do the process. It is underfunded and there is not as many people working. However, all the applications are still coming in. So you have people that are applying. And for example, we applied in December of 2000 and it didn't get approved until 2005. So, and that's, and that was nonstop going to give information, speak in front of judges, get interviews, get questioned, and it still took years to do it. I'm sorry, not 2005, 2009. I apologize.
Okay.
So that's 9 years of going back and forth and having to pay a pretty ridiculous amount of money. Because since it takes so long, you have to get a work permit and you have to pay for the work permit. You have to pay for the lawyers, you have to pay for the process, and it's not cheap. And if you're already in a terrible situation where you're fleeing a country, you probably don't usually have the means to do it.
But in the meantime, are you an only child?
No, I have an older brother.
Okay, so in the meantime, you and your brother are going to school and are already living in America, and say that the process derails, doesn't work out. Most of these people, as far as I understand it, they're not turning around and putting them on a plane and chasing them right back out the country. They're just kind of forgetting about them, and they're just kind of floating around now without really being tracked or anything.
Yeah, you're just kind of stuck in limbo. It's like, yes, you are here and have documentation, but you are not considered a resident.
So you're,
or a legal resident, permanent resident. Mhm.
but you're still paying taxes. You're
Yes.
still going to school. You're still getting health care and getting a driver's license and these other things in the meantime.
You can get a driver's license. You can't get any benefits, and I think that's a big misconception that people have is that um, I've heard that people make claims that undocumented immigrants have all these benefits, but even if you are documented, you do not get benefits. As a child, yes, you get to go to school and you can get like vaccines and just, stuff like that because it's going to affect other kids, but you can't get any type of benefits like, welfare or food stamps or anything like that.
But you go to the hospital, you have, an ID and things, you can be treated and taken care of. See, the thing with all of the people who actually came over here from the Middle East, the real issue with it is that it was just such a huge amount of people coming all at once that, yes, maybe the process does take too long, but even with that said, it's a process that takes a long time, and you have so many people coming in at once. I mean, I don't want to put any numbers out there because I really have no clue, but you saw the pictures of people just standing at airports and all over the place, points of entry, just waiting to get in by the hundreds all over the nation. And really, as far as I understand it, the UN actually for their for the laws for asylum is that you're supposed to go to the nearest country or the nearest country that will that allows asylum seekers, and for people to somehow end up all the way from the Middle East all the way over in the West seems like they skipped a couple in the meantime.
I had no idea about that, but I would also think that if you're fleeing to, let's say, to a different country, maybe you don't want to go to a country with the same type of old regulations that the country you're fleeing has. Like if you're a woman in a Middle Eastern country that has tough laws on women, I would doubt you would want to stay somewhere in another Middle Eastern country that is a Muslim country, having to go through the same thing. So,
Yeah. Okay. So after all of that debacle, and there's still people from the Middle East trying to get in. Now we have what's a crisis in coming from Mexico and Guatemala and all of these other countries of caravans of people in packs just walking over here to come into the United States, and Trump would like funding to build a wall. In the meantime, I understand if people say, I don't want I think that the better option is to change laws and make it easier for people to become citizens. I understand that, but I don't understand how specifically just a wall you can be against that. Not we're not talking about saying we're no longer letting anybody in at all. We're just saying we want them going to ports of entry. We want them coming in as documented immigrants instead of just sneaking over the border and coming in undocumented. And I don't understand how that can be a problem. I really don't.
okay, I think what it comes down to is what's going to be more effective. So you have the majority of undocumented immigrants aren't people that are coming across the border, like hopping the border. It's people that are coming here legally with visas and overstaying their visas. So
Yeah.
if we really want to address the problem of undocumented immigrants, we need to reform law and change the way that the pathways to citizenship, because people say they dislike undocumented immigration, but yet they're making the pathways to citizenship harder. You take things like DACA, even though, it could be a pathway to citizenship, but you change TPS laws, you change certain asylum laws. So I think we need to reform the immigration laws we have, and that's what's going to be more effective. Go ahead.
Again, I don't disagree with that. I don't have any issue with reforming the laws, but a wall, just a wall, that's all we're talking about. We can say, let's build a wall, but we also need to worry about reforming the immigration laws. I don't, that's fine. But right now, we're talking about an actual budget. And I don't think, as far as the budget goes, we need any more money to reform the law. We need more money, or maybe we need more people to process papers and man courts and things like that. Fine. But a wall specifically, why don't we want a wall?
I would ask specifically what your point would be for getting a wall. What do you think it's going to accomplish?
To stop people from coming in outside of points of entry. I understand that you're saying that a bigger issue is people overstaying their visas, but we're not no one is saying this is going to fix the whole problem right here, right now. We're just going to build a wall and it's all done. Everything's golden. No one is saying that. As crazy as Trump is, I have not even heard him say anything so outrageous as this will fix everything. He wants to build a wall, and even more so, I think it's even a better point to show that all of the people who voted for Trump were obviously in favor of a wall. That was his platform. Like, that was his main stance while campaigning, was that he was going to build a wall. And so if you can see, all right, it was like with Obama. All these people obviously wanted health care or free health care for the United States, and that was what Obama ran on. And so when he gets into office, it makes sense to pass some form of this and then maybe reform it later. But since that's what Americans voted for, we should let that in of some sort, of some form, some way, eventually let that in, because that is what Americans voted for when they voted for Obama. I think the same thing with Trump. People voted for that wall. America, like it or not, America voted for that wall, and they have the right to their votes. It's not, obviously this is not a purely democratic country, but they did vote for this guy with that intention in mind. And I feel like just that alone should be enough to say, all right, let's go ahead and get this wall, because apparently people think it's a good idea.
The difference with Obama is that he went through Congress to get a law passed to do it. I don't think maybe holding the government, 800,000 people hostage, is the way to go about it. But the majority in the polling, the majority of Americans do not agree with the wall. Mainly, they don't agree that, the majority agree that it's not a priority, and there's still over 50% that think that this should never be done. So, again, I understand he talked about a wall nonstop. He does talk about how it's going to stop criminals from coming in and drugs from coming in. So I guess when I asked about what you think you want to accomplish with that wall, if it's, drugs, the majority of drugs come in through a legal port of entry. It does come in through the southern border, but it's through legal ports of entry. So again, that you're not really addressing the problem. It's more of like a symbol at this point. So what would work is not just reforming immigration, but increasing patrol, increasing manpower, and getting better technology. So if you're going to spend money, you can give Trump $5.7 billion for a wall. That's not going to build a good bit of it. Estimates are way higher than that. But so I think if we're going to spend money, a good bit of money, billions and billions of dollars, it should be on something that's going to actually address the problem, not just a small percentage of it. And if you have a wall, if you don't add the manpower, it's not going to do much good. They just found all these tunnels. you see people getting over the wall. So it's not just strictly a wall, because without the manpower to back it, it's not really good, do much good.
Yes, but we all know with coyotes and people who do use these other ways to get in to the country, it is dangerous. And these are criminals who are helping them through there, and lots of times do horrible things on the long road, uh, smuggling them over. And, you know, women get raped, people get killed, and more often than not, they just get robbed. They just say, hey, look, give me all this money, give me thousands and thousands of dollars, and I will get you there. And then they get them out in the middle of the desert and leave them and just walk away to starve and dehydrate and die of thirst. And more so, if you put up a wall, it will at least slow them down. If somebody wants to just walk over versus trying to climb or dig through or dig under a wall, we're slowing them down to where one person just driving up and down this wall, as long as they can cover, 10 miles every couple hours, that's a lot easier, right? But what they are doing is they're using other military sections of government and bringing them in to help man the borders and to help deal with immigration and to help deal with immigrants that are being seized. And that seems like it's still an issue. It's not a fix, but it is an issue that should be addressed. And a wall doesn't fix everything, but it does address that issue and those issues.
So a lot of people that cross over illegally through the border do so because they can't cross legally, mainly because my grandpa, for example, he applied for a visa 15 years ago, and he just got it approved. So I was just now able to see him since 2000. It was my first time seeing him. So people skip all that because they know that either it will get denied because they don't approve everybody, or it will take years upon years. So they believe that the easier solution is to just get over here any way they can, especially if you are seeking asylum and you have some, you could have gang members after you, or it could be political, like me, political asylum. So in asylum laws tell you can come here illegally and still apply for asylum because they understand that there is extenuating circumstances that could happen. So I think if we reform immigration, that would also take care of a good bit of that problem, because people just don't even bother applying.
Again, we're on the same page as far as reform goes and as far as it taking too long, but I can't agree that just because you have trouble getting in or you think it's taking too long that you should be able to just come over illegally, undocumented, and slip right into the country without any issues whatsoever. We're on the same page for most of this. It's just once it gets to the wall, I'm not understanding how there can be. I understand why you think there's other issues or more important issues. I just don't understand why somebody could be against a wall specifically. And you even said that most people think that the wall should never be built. And I don't understand why. I don't understand, I think it was Nancy Pelosi that a wall is immoral. What? Why? How is a wall immoral? It's just a wall. It will help. It is something that can help, and other countries have seen it proven to be helpful. We're not saying that it fixes everything. It's not the end-all be-all, but it helps. Can you at least agree that it would help, that it would do something?
Yes, I can agree that it would slow people down, because at the end of the day they will get under or over. My personal issue with it is that if we are going to spend billions of dollars, I'd rather spend it on something that's going to be useful and that's going to actually be more effective. So that's it. I guess if we have billions of dollars to throw away, I guess I'd
We
be
don't.
okay with it. We don't. So I would rather do what's most effective, what's going to help the majority of cases, as opposed to spending that much money on something that's going to only address a small percentage.
And so money makes sense. That's a good, fair point, is that it is just really expensive. But if you say, hey, look, we want to start small, start somewhere where we can, just, if we go reform things and make different laws for points of entry, yet people are not using those points of entry already, then it doesn't make sense to reform anything when we still have all these other people crossing over a border. Whereas we can build a wall and force people to these points of entry and then say, all right, now that they're all going there, now we can reform these laws and make it easier. And I'm sure that your point is going to be, hey, if they reform the laws, everybody's going through these points of entry anyways, but the criminals are not. And we know the criminals are not, or not all criminals are, and we know that there will still be, no matter how loose we make these laws, until we just say, hey, everybody come over all willy-nilly, we're handing out social security cards, then people will still come over the border illegally. And I think that one of the things that gets lost in this is that the people who are for a wall are somehow racist. And even more so than anything, you don't even have to be for a wall. You just say, hey, I'm a conservative, I'm a Republican, I'm a Christian. You are probably going to be a Nazi or a neo-Nazi, or some sort, your comparisons to Hitler will be all over the place. That, I think, is taking it way too far. If you're talking about, so far, and again, this is just me, I'm a white male. Apparently that, as of lately, means that my opinion does not matter very much. So I think I got into the wrong hobby as far as starting a podcast goes. But that's what I have you here for. What is it that Trump says that makes him a racist?
First, I just want to point out I disagree with blanket statements. So I disagree with saying like all Christians are like this or all conservatives are like this. I'm personally atheist, but most of my friends are Christians. My fiance is a believer. My mom's a believer. So it's just blanket statements are bad. I think as far as Trump, he has made certain comments that kind of make it, they're kind of on the line. Like, for example, and this was a big one for me, was in Charlottesville when you had Nazis and white supremacists, on the streets and stuff, and somebody gets killed, and you have protesters there protesting the Nazis and white supremacists. You have Trump then come on, and instead of saying like this is terrible, like, and denouncing it, he's like, well, there was good people on both sides. So I think that when you are saying that the Nazis have good people on their side, I think it definitely confuses a lot of people. And then they feel like, okay, so you're excusing their behavior instead of condemning it. And I think that's the main one for me.
He definitely should have denounced it. He should have. He has put himself into a corner where, and all Republicans have, where I assume you believe in socialism or more social, you lean more towards socialism with, no?
No. I think people use that term now to more of a scare tactic, but no, I believe in certain government programs like healthcare and education kind of the way that now we have certain programs that we pay for with our taxes. Like you have school, you have police departments, you have fire departments, stuff like that. That's what
Yeah, but if we take all of the necessities, and me personally, I don't think that healthcare is that much of a necessity. I think that what is it, Medicaid is good, and that's as far as my beliefs go with necessity. Okay, um, fire departments, police departments, things like that, those are necessities, and I think that especially when you already have healthcare in place, the the issue is that you're going to when you bring out this government healthcare, you now already have all of these companies that have built themselves through capitalism, and you're now saying, "Hey, we're going to have this government funded uh, um, healthcare system that will make it to where you all have to change your laws or your rules and who you let in and who you don't, and your processes and your payments." And in the end, for me specifically, I had just gotten healthcare by the time that Obamacare started rolling out, and my stuff got way more expensive in the end. And I am now paying double what I was before that came out. To me, as somebody who is working and gets healthcare through their job, I feel like I lost in the end, and all of these other people um, ended up getting much cheaper or even close to free healthcare that came from the rest of us who already had it. And I don't think that healthcare specifically is a God-given right. I didn't have healthcare for a long time, and I went to the doctor, and I still have thousands of dollars in bills that I have to pay to hospitals and ERs and urgent cares that I owe them now, that I'm in debt. But um, the I forgot where I was going with this, because there was a reason why I asked you if you had socialist beliefs, and now we got too stuck on the socialist and but yes, I think that the healthcare ended up kind of. I think that the more you grow government and the more power you give them, the more that they can screw us over, and the more that we will screw over capitalism itself.
I think that there's a big problem in this country, and that is that we let corporations rule everything. Um,
I don't
even
see it as a
our
problem.
politicians. You don't see it as a problem when they can basically buy our politicians when they're making laws. It's for corporations instead of for what's good for the people. I have no problem with capitalism. I think it's great. I'm just concerned specifically with healthcare, because I do think that, not that it's a God-given right or anything like that, but I definitely don't want to see a child dying because they can't afford healthcare. So um, Obamacare was pretty bad, but there was some good things that he was trying to sneak in there. But his problem was that he let corporations still uh, kind of take ownership of all of that. And what they did was just increase all their rates. It changed nothing because you still let them control it. So they just increased their rates. No big deal. So they keep increasing their rates and increasing them. And you have pharmaceutical companies with the same drug, and they keep increasing the prices and keep increasing them, and until it's just become this ridiculous abuse of power. So I would rather the government kind of regulate that, because I do think that everybody should have access to free healthcare, just like they have access to education, especially
Well,
kids.
and on top of that, lots of doctors don't even accept the Obamacare. I can't remember what the official government name of it, affordable health care or whatever it is. They don't actually accept it. And so when you finally get this and you're trying to go to the doctor or get help, they're they don't accept it anyways, and so you're still going to pay these outrageous amounts. And what I think, what I have more of a problem with is if they could fix more of the pricing issues. Now, the doctors, because of all of these different organizations that will help you pay for things and get you medical help through whatever, without getting insurance, they now are able to raise prices for all sorts of things to outrageous amounts of money. And on top of that, if you go to a hospital, I have bills, I have money that I owe hospitals, and they're not the top of my priorities. They're not something that I'm trying to pay back as soon as possible. And so therefore even more people are they're raising the prices even more, so that some of the people who actually do pay end up helping pay for all the people who are not paying. And it takes away from a capitalism view to where we need them to have competing prices. I need to be able to call a doctor and say, hey, if I want an x-ray, can I get a price on this? How much is it going to cost me? And then when they tell me, I call another guy and say, hey, how much are you going to charge me for an x-ray? But instead, you call, the doctor has no clue. He's never even looked at the prices. The women up front will say, well, we'll send you a bill eventually. I mean, we don't really know. There's too many departments to really figure out. I went to the doctor one time, all right, and the woman told me, if you pay $200 right now, your total will end up $300, and you will pay $200 of it off right now. I was like, for real? She's like, yes, right now, we do this, it's over. I said, okay, cool. I said, well, here's $200. I'll have $100 next week, and we'll get it over with. She said, okay, cool. So I give her the $100 next week. Think it's done. But then the radiology department calls and says, hey, you owe about $10,000 for your scans. And then the nurses department calls and says you owe another $5,000. And then and there were just, I think in the end I had like 4 different collection agencies who my debt was sold off to, so that they could now come and try to collect on me for one visit that took maybe, it should have taken maybe 20 minutes. It took a little over an hour, but it was just a real quick, nothing major, nothing outrageous. And they wouldn't even give me what I needed until they did all this extra stuff. I know that they didn't want to get sued, but I also think there's a part of it where they say, hey, we need to make more money. We need to go ahead and push him into getting these x-rays, getting all this other unnecessary stuff. That takes away from capitalism. That
Yes.
takes away from competing prices. And a lot of this has to do with government regulations on who you do and don't help and things like that.
Yeah, that's why I wouldn't necessarily mind if you kept the companies, as long as there was different types of regulation on, like prices, for example, or like, let's say with pharmaceuticals, medication, for how long you can have a patent for, because you basically get to monopolize a medicine that is necessary to save people's lives. So there's no competition there at all in any way, shape, or form. So I just think it needs to be more regulated, if not completely changed.
Well, I had this idea and I thought it was an original idea. And then as I started doing more research, found out there's already a company who thought of it before me. I was thinking, hey, look, why not have this this company where it's like health insurance, but we all share costs. And instead of me charging you every month for with money that you'll never use, and then charge you even more when you finally do use it, I will just make insurance where you first start, you put in a down payment, let's say like $200, right? So you start off with $200, and then everybody, say there's thousands of people, hundreds of thousands, whatever, that are using this deposit money every time they go to the doctor. Then this one person goes to the doctor, it costs them $1,000. That $1,000 is split between everybody who ended up who is a part of this. And so now we send out a bill for all of the money that we spent. It's a nonprofit. We're not making money. We're not upcharging. It's just how much we spent on paying off their medical bills, right? Well, there's a company, and I don't want to missay this. I believe it's called Christian Share or Christian Meta Share or something like that, where it's a group of Christians who share each other's costs. So they start out with a certain amount, and then every month, they get a bill for just the amount that was spent on medical expenses, medications and ER bills and all those sorts of things, and they spend way less. The cool thing about it, for me at least, is on top of that, for Christians, they also put some of your medical information out there so that everybody who's sharing these costs can also help pray for you and your ailments and send you messages and communicate with you and see how you're doing. But if things could be a lot closer than that to that would be great. Healthcare is an issue, but I had high hopes for Obama. I liked him. I thought he was a cool guy. I would not have voted for him. Would not have dreamt of it. But I had high hopes as a patriot. I want our presidents to do well, and the same with Trump. I did not vote for the guy. When he does well, when he does something good, I'm happy for him. I'm cheering him on. When he does something stupid, I'm calling him an idiot right with everybody else. Actually, this hat right here is from what's it called? There's a John Oliver. You ever watch John Oliver?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, he does like the comedy politics show on HBO. So funny. Found out that Donald Trump's like great grandfather's name was Drumpf, and changed their name.
Oh, that's amazing.
To Trump eventually, and sold these hats.
Great.
Make Donald Drumpf again. I had to get one. These are so great. But yeah, I cheer them on when they're doing well, but the Obamacare did not work out well.
I agree.
Things worse, and I don't think that there is a good version of that you can make, and I think this only proved there's not a good version of it in a capitalist system. There's not a good version of it that you can come out with that will stop everybody else from either getting worse or profiting even more.
I mean, there's like a bunch of models that have worked great, for example, in Canada and in Europe. But, I guess that's depending on your preference. But they've worked great. And I just think something needs to be done regardless because, I mean, it is ridiculously expensive. And like you said, you pay a ridiculous amount every month. And then you go to the doctor and they're like, oh, here's your copay. And it's a big amount of money too, and then you have to pay a certain percentage of this, and then now your medicines, and then now if this surgery, it's ridiculous. And if you don't have money to pay for it, I mean, that's your life.
Well, there are lots of companies that do help people with payments on specific things. When I was taking medication for an addiction, there was companies that paid the entire thing for me. I never had to pay a dime, and they always they would sometimes, for a while, they actually sent the bottles to my doctor's office, and then eventually they just paid for it. Like all I had to do was swipe a card every time I went to CVS or wherever, and it was automatically paid for. But that actually brings me to my next thought or topic. Medical marijuana,
yes,
seems to be working in some states as a deterrent to harder drugs. While I personally still believe that it is a gateway drug, I also believe that part of the gateway drug process is that you are committing illegal acts that get you now associated with other criminals, and you are now doing more and more crime or other criminal acts become easier and more normalized to you, and then more and more harder and more dangerous things become normalized and easier as well. Though, from what I've read, there's crime rates dropping from the legalization of, and not just, you would think, yeah, of course crime rates are dropping. People aren't getting arrested for weed. No, violent crimes are dropping in huge numbers. But not what I cannot find data on, what I cannot find out there, and with as somebody who is not appreciative of the mainstream media being so biased on the left side, I feel like it's hard for me to find information that would maybe, if I wanted to find out what the bad parts of medical marijuana or legalization have been, I would assume I want to know what the overdose rates are. I want to know if they've gone down, if they've gone up, but I don't see any data on it anywhere. And I have looked, and if you look in some of my posts from yesterday on one of the videos or clips that we put out, people are talking about it, and they're trying to, like, say, yeah, but crime rates dropped and this dropped. But we can't find anything on whether or not the overdose rates have dropped. And if this is thought of as a gateway drug, which again, anything can be your gateway drug. Whatever you start off with, that's a gateway drug. But I know it's a gateway drug. I'm not going to debate this with anybody, but I think that the legalization of it could deter you, and the numbers that would let you know is whether or not overdose rates have gone up or down.
I think that I would probably say alcohol is more of a gateway drug than.
Hold on, though. Hold on.
Yes.
I would say the same thing, except for the fact that I believe that most Americans drink. Most Americans do not move on to harder drugs.
I agree. There's people that will try something and be done with it, and then you have people who try it and cannot stop doing it once they try it. But as far as the overdoses, I think that would be hard to pin because you have so many different variables, like the fact that, like with heroin, people are putting fentanyl in heroin at, in bigger amounts. So I think it would be, it's also, I believe it's also a societal issue, and I don't know, I just think it's too many variables that you'd have to pin down to be able to actually make a case for that.
But it doesn't matter if they're putting fentanyl in it or not. If you're overdosing, you're likely doing harder drugs. And I saw a piece that actually said that doctors are avoiding prescribing painkillers because they feel like those are, the problem, and that they're they're only pushing medical marijuana, but that cannot replace painkillers like oxycodone or Percocets. Those cannot replace those drugs for people with chronic pain. I think that medical marijuana can be helpful, but it's not a painkiller. It's not.
I agree. I don't think it can once you hit a certain threshold of pain. I don't know that marijuana would help much. So I'm not really sure. I haven't actually looked at numbers on that. But I am absolutely open to medical marijuana. I'm not really sure why it was illegal to begin with. I don't think it's anywhere near, the level that they had it with like heroin and meth, so I'm all for it.
Well, the issue with them not prescribing these painkillers is that the people who are trying, if they're pushing, say you have some sort of ailment or some sort of chronic pain, and they're not giving you prescriptions for painkillers. They're just pushing these medical marijuana cards on you. What's the first thing you're going to go do? If medical marijuana is not helping you, what's the first thing you're going to go do?
I'm guessing you're gonna say go find an illegal opiate.
Yes.
I I would have to find a study on exactly numbers on that, but I wouldn't. I would say that that's wrong if you're a doctor and you have a patient who is in obvious pain. That obviously just not pushing marijuana on them would help. But I think that doctors were overprescribing opiates to begin with, and
Yes.
I'm just glad that they're moving away from that.
Yes.
But if it is necessary, I mean, obviously, if you have somebody that has just had surgery or has cancer, is dying, or is in terrible pain for, a major disease or something like that, they should be able to get access to painkillers.
I personally, I've had a history with painkillers and the harder drugs, and I didn't start with weed, though I've been to too many rehabs and too many NA meetings to know that most everybody does who moves on to the harder stuff. They do start with that, and so I cannot deny them their voice that or their opinion, or if they start with medical marijuana, or sorry, not medical marijuana, if they start with marijuana, you immediately start using the dopamine in your brain to give you the good feelings, right? And as you wear that down, you build a tolerance. And the more you build this tolerance, the more you do what's called chasing the dragon, where you are trying to get back to that high that you had in the beginning. And the only way you eventually can do it is either by stopping for a long period of time to build your or to let your tolerance wear down, or you go find something else. And that's what most people will do. And I personally started with painkillers after getting surgery, and didn't. I don't want to say that I didn't know I was doing anything wrong, because obviously, if I'm taking painkillers, that are prescribed to me, but I was too young to really get all of that at the time. I was maybe 14 or 15 years old, and then I didn't like the way it made me feel while I was actually in pain, in major pain. I was already, in excruciating pain, and it's making me nauseous, and it's making me throw up, and it's just making things even worse. So I wait a little while until I'm, able to function, and then I start taking it again. And then I like the way it makes me feel. Then I enjoy it, actually, and so then I keep seeking it out more and more, and eventually found weed way later on and stuck to that for a while, but it just wasn't good enough, and then moved on to the much harder things from there. And I afterwards, after getting clean and after getting off all of that, I found drugs like Suboxone, or what's the other one?
Methadone.
Methadone. Yes, I found these very helpful, and then since then, I've ended up with chronic pain issues in my knees, and if I didn't have something to help me better than Tylenol, better than Aleve, then I wouldn't be able to go to work every day. I wouldn't be able to work, 70, 80 hours like I do. And excuse me, I need something like that. And so I stick to other medications that are normally used to treat addiction instead of actually taking the painkillers themselves. Some people would argue that if you're still addicted, then that's the main issue. I wonder, did you have any experience with these drugs?
So I personally started just drinking, thinking it was just fun, college or high school, started drinking, and I tried smoking because I was drunk. I was always very anti-drug. I grew up in a very strict household, so I was very anti-drug, but I tried smoking and I hated it. So I never did it again. But then I tried an Oxycontin, and lo and behold, I got addicted to Oxycontin. And so personally for me, it was not weed. The alcohol was what kind of started me trying different stuff and just being like, I don't care, I'm drunk. And I kept making terrible decisions. So that's why I'm saying I think it's different for everybody. But I actually just got out of prison in June, and I was in there for drugs. And I met a lot of people who had done all sorts of drugs and had different stories. And weirdly enough, a lot of them that did hard drugs did not like weed. They all were very outspoken about the fact that they hated smoking weed. But they, were meth addicts or heroin addicts or, so I think it just depends on the person. And what we need to work on is teaching people about coping mechanisms and how to actually deal with things that happen in life naturally instead of having to use something, and teaching them exactly what happens when you put those drugs in your body. Because I remember in high school we were taught about drugs, but it wasn't really in depth, and it wasn't anything scientific about it. It was more just like scare tactics that you were like, these are ridiculous, I'm gonna just dismiss them. And I think we need to actually sit people down, teenagers and even younger, and explain to them like, this is what can happen, this is what it's going to do to your body. Because I know for a fact that it would have been very different for me and for a lot of my friends.
Well, when we were younger, we had what was called DARE. And
Yeah.
DARE came in and they would talk to you about weed, about heroin, about, PCP and methamphetamine and all of these different drugs, but they didn't talk about painkillers. That was, and it was still kind of an unknown. Like people didn't understand. Heroin was actually made by Bayer in the beginning as just like Tylenol. You bought it over the counter, real simple, just picked it up, walked out with it, and you take it, and eventually people got addicted, and they got, they started having bigger and bigger issues, and so they took it off, and that's where the name comes from. Bayer made this stuff. They passed it out, and before anybody knew any better, it got out of hand. And so when they would come and talk to us, they'd talk about weed and heroin and the main stuff, but they didn't talk about painkillers. They didn't talk about they didn't talk about Oxycontin. They didn't talk about Percocet. They didn't talk about oxycodone or Roxy or any of this other stuff. They didn't mention it. And so when I was younger, it just wasn't known. It wasn't something that I thought you could get addicted to. I think the first time I ever actually knew or heard it was an addictive substance or anything like that is when Rush Limbaugh, I was sitting in the car with my dad and he's listening to Rush Limbaugh. I believe it was Rush Limbaugh. I'm not positive, but I believe it was him. And he came on and said, look, I want to be honest with everybody. I want to make sure that you guys can trust me and that I can be honest with you guys. So I want to tell you, like, I've been addicted to prescription painkillers for a while. And I remember thinking, what? This is a prescription though. Like you can't get addicted to a prescription. That doesn't make any sense. And so later, for me, again, I like the drugs that they come out with that are opioid mixed with whatever else to help you cope with it. But I don't think that addiction itself is the problem. And I think that you can be addicted to things if you're able to cope, if you're able to go along with your day. Heroin would not be a problem if people showed up to work.
Yes.
If they didn't rob people, if they didn't start doing other crazy things, it wouldn't be that big of a problem. And everybody's addicted to things like caffeine and they're addicted to, whatever else. And so if you're able to find something that helps you, or you need it actually medically, and you happen to be addicted at the same time, fine. As long as you can live your life without any other consequences, your family members, and you're not lying, you're not cheating, because a whole other world comes with the bad addiction. I'm not saying the other one's a good addiction, but not, I wouldn't call it a bad addiction.
Right. I agree.
If you can cope, you're fine. And there's lots of people who have found other opioid type of medications like Suboxone, like methadone, where they're able to take this for long periods of time afterwards, and they're able to cope, and they go to work, and they show up to their jobs, and they're productive members of society afterwards, and life gets better for them. So I'd say when I hear people turning around and saying, look, we can't be throwing people in jail for addiction, I start to disagree. If you're on the bad side of addiction, you need to go to jail and serve your time, and then maybe get out and go to rehab or something like that as well. That would be helpful. And maybe if they put classes and NA classes and AA classes in jail, in more jails, I know that they do have them in lots of jails, and almost all prisons have these meetings, but you still have to pay a price. There has to be some sort of scare tactic, and there has to be something that you pay back to society if you are committing crimes and getting addicted and doing all sorts of other things while you're doing it.
I am very outspokenly like I disagree completely with making it a criminal issue. I think, depending on what you do while you're high, obviously, but
Yes.
just
Yeah.
for like possession of drugs, I disagree with making it a criminal issue, because now not only do you have a felony and you're going to jail, but then you get out and then you have this felony on your record, and it's absolutely terrible.
Well, we're from the Atlanta area.
Yes.
Around here, all over the place, they have what's called drug court, where they're trying to reintegrate you into society, into your families, back with your kids, in a ease for you and for them that makes it an educational process for all of you, to where you're able to understand what it is that you lost while you were doing these drugs, or while you were addicted, and the parts of your moral compass that somewhat just disappeared, and how it affected the other people, and what you need to do to rebuild these relationships. I think drug court's good. I think it helps people, and they also put you on somewhat of a probationary period as well, to where you're getting drug tested, and they're working with you. But if you turn around and go right back to doing drugs, they're going to throw you right back in jail, and they're going to take you off of drug court. You got your chance, you failed. Now you go back and you do your time in prison, or you get put on longer probationary periods or whatever. But they give you chances to find your way out. It's not easy in addiction. You're almost always going to go right back at some point, but they give you your chances through legal processes.
I think, and I think drug court is great. I think the problem is that obviously those are programs that need more funding, because it is a lot of people that we're talking about. But you can't qualify for drug court for a lot of reasons, and I think they need to amplify the whole system so that you can help more people. But they also do AA, and I am so for people going to AA if it helps you. I think they need to have different programs. For example, I did Smart Recovery while I was in jail, because I'm atheist, and they only offered an AA class and an NA class, and it was a very Christian AA and NA class. I personally get nothing from those because I'm not a believer and I'm not spiritual. So what worked for me was like a science-based approach to it, and more of like a psychological, therapeutical approach, with like helping with like cognitive behavior therapy, changing the way I think and changing the way I cope with things. So I think they need to integrate those programs more, but in certain states they have. I don't know about most of Georgia. I just know from what I've, from the jail I went to and the prisons I went to, they were strictly AA programs and Christian programs.
Christian programs, as far as I know, I didn't do much of the 12-step process, but as far as I know, they just have a believe in a higher power.
Yes.
Is one of the things that they recommend, and I'm assuming that's what you took issue with.
I am not spiritual in any way, shape, or form, so they tell me like, well, it can be anything, but I can't even do that because I'm not spiritual at all. So
no Mother Earth, no,
I don't see it as like a higher power. I think
not even like Hillary Clinton. Come on,
no, God, no, no, Hillary, please. No. So, but I think what helped me was the approach that like you're in charge at the end of the day. Now you're clean, you're detoxed. It's your choice to make now. So let me empower you to make better choices. So I think the whole higher power kind of took that away from me, and I couldn't connect. But some people do, and I think it's great, and it helps a lot of people, and I'm all for it. But I just saw that a lot of people couldn't quite connect with AA or NA. So I think they need to have because not everything's going to work for everybody. So you need a plethora of programs to reach, a good bit of people. And then in prison, they offer only AA and NA, and then a Christian recovery program. And most of the people I met were drug addicts. And it was just amazing to me that they didn't have more classes or counseling when we all needed it. But again, they all need funding for that. So
my issue with the rehabs that I went to or the NA meetings that I went to was that they would tell me I am not in control.
Yes.
That I need to understand that I have no control over my decisions because I am an addict, that I will always be an addict for the rest of my life. There is nothing that I can do about that, and I will not be able to help my decisions that I make. And then they bring my family in and they start telling them like, hey, look, he can't help any of this. This is not under his, he has no control over this. And I'm sitting there thinking like, yes, I understand that that this stuff led me to do some messed up stuff that I never would have done otherwise. I mean, same as you, I grew up in a very stern household. Nobody had ever even tried drugs. None of them were ever interested in drinking. My parents didn't drink at all. They didn't smoke cigarettes. Like none of that stuff was ever even brought up, as far as somebody actually doing it. But, as far as being opposed to it, yes, they talked about it. They were very opposed to that sort of stuff. And then when these people bring them in and they're trying to tell them, look, he has no control over this. He can't help it. He's just doing what the drugs tell him to do. It's like the devil on his shoulder, just whispering stuff in his ear. And I believe that part. It is a devil on my shoulder whispering stuff in my ear, but I still have free will and I still make my own decisions, and I don't appreciate being told that I have absolutely no control over my life or that I'm going to be an addict for the rest of my life and this is all I'm ever going to think about 40 years from now, and I'm just supposed to somehow block it out and try to not listen to it. So I took issue with that, but the Christian part of it, the higher power, I don't disagree with. And I wonder if you're brought up in a Christian family or your and your relatives are Christians, what is the issue that you take with the church?
I went to Catholic school. When I grew up in Columbia, I was in a private Catholic school. I can't ever say that I believed in God, because even when I was young, it just didn't make any sense to me. We'd have Bible study and we'd be reading the stories from the Bible. And my brother and I, he's the only one I could talk to, we'd be like, this doesn't make sense. So my mom grew up very Catholic, so she's more of a deist now, like she just believes in a higher power, but does random Catholic rituals because it's so ingrained in her. My dad's an atheist, but I still thought, like, okay, maybe there's a God, maybe it's just not, this whole Catholic thing is just not making sense, but maybe there's something. So I decided to look into it and research, and I started researching, and I researched different religions. I read the Bible a bunch of times. I read the Quran. My brother is into a lot of Asian stuff, so he, tried Buddhism, and it just, I never could quite understand it, because the way I want to think about it is that I need evidence for it. My parents are also scientists, so I was doing biochemistry. My brain works in that way, so I need evidence. So I understand when people say, like, I have faith, this is my faith, and I believe this because it's my faith. I get that. I personally can't do it. I don't know why. I need evidence. So I just left that.
Obviously wanting evidence makes sense, and we want proof of things. And for me, my proof is life. It's that we're all here. It's that nothing comes from nothing, that you can't just have stuff just all of a sudden appear and everybody's here. We are such intricate beings, and we have this this necessity for something greater than us, and this love and this drive to do something bigger than ourselves around us. And for me specifically, just to see what I think it was Pastor Graham who said that faith, and I believe I mentioned this actually in the last podcast, so I don't mean to keep repeating myself, but it's that faith is like the wind. You see the wind, you can't see the wind, but you feel it, and you see the effects that it has all around you. And for people who are lost and then get saved, you see this dramatic change in their life, and you see this this love, that grows inside of them, and this necessity for learning and gaining more access to God through prayer and through church and community and the Bible, and it just grows inside of them. And to see this, to me, is the proof. It is the proof that I need, and it's what makes a difference to me. When I was younger, especially when I was smoking weed, I like to tell my parents, I'd be like, look, I don't care if y'all are Christians, I want to smoke weed, so if y'all got issues with that, like maybe I'm not Christian, maybe I'm what's the Jamaican one?
Rastafarian.
Yeah, maybe I'm Rastafarian. Or I'd make up stuff. I'd be like, what the Bible says, that your body is a temple, and you need to treat your body as the temple. And in the temple, they burn incense and they have smoke. And I'm just filling my temple with smoke. That's what I'm doing. That's what I need to do. And I made up all sorts of stuff. But in the end, I came right back to where I ended up. Was I looked at, different religions and tried to find what was most convenient for me for a while. And then I started thinking, no, I need to find like real actual truth, which led me back to Christianity. And no offense to the Catholic Church, but everything that I found made me very, very opposed to Catholics and Catholicism. It seemed more based on, like you said, rituals and acts and things like that, whereas other denominations like Baptists and those would say that it's being a Christian or getting into heaven has nothing to do with the things that you do in your regular life. It's more about whether or not you've accepted Jesus into your heart as your Lord and Savior. If you're saved, then you are now going to heaven. Being a good person does not change that. You will want to be a good person because you're a Christian or because you got saved, but the acts that you do don't change it. And I thought that's brilliant. Like if I'm a Christian, I get saved and I end up um, becoming a drug addict and doing all sorts of other horrible things, it doesn't mean that I'm now not going to heaven. It means that I just got lost for a while or I went down the wrong road, but I'm doing things that are wrong just as everybody does, and I'm still welcome into the kingdom of heaven in the end. And that I so I said, well, what can kind of like help me learn about God and bring me closer to him more than anything else. And that was the Bible. And so to find a church that says, hey, look, we just care about what the Bible says. We're not going to reinterpret this. We're not going to change it. We're not going to try to find out what it means to you. We're going to try to find out what it was meant to mean when it was written. Because if we believe that this is God's word, then it's very important that we know exactly what it is that God is saying to us. And Baptists seem to put me in that place and made it all make sense to me personally. And I understand people who want more proof than that. But if you are also somebody who wants more proof than that and say, I'm not going to believe in this because there's not enough proof on it, but then you're going to try to tell me that you believe in the Big Bang Theory, then I'm going to be like, all right, you make no sense, buddy. You're kind of stretching here now. You believe you have to put faith in these scientists because they're not making a whole lot of sense or showing a whole lot of proof either.
No, why? Okay, so the good thing about science is that it has a process down perfect, which is how we can have medicine and all sorts of technological advances. So you have the scientific method, but then you also have peer review, and so people can check what you're doing in your research and your conclusions and your evidence. And that's how you get scientific consensus. So the Big Bang Theory is the best model that we have for the explanation of how the universe started.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's not faith because it is a process that has been proven to work. And
hold on though.
Yes.
Hold on. Because these are processes to prove things. And you can't prove, and they've even said we cannot prove the Big Bang Theory, mainly because you have to have somebody recreate your process, and if they cannot recreate it or do it again, then it's unprovable. But this is still what we believe to be the best, like you said, the best model for how this all got here. But it started out with just some dude sitting around, theorizing on how it came. And instead of them saying, hey, let's set out to figure out how all this started in the beginning, they started with a model and said, let's see if we can prove this happened. And it just seems a little ridiculous to start with a model and keep convincing yourself more and more of that model. The most of the proof against stuff like religion or the Bible and when creation started is that things are older than it would have been when the Bible was or when the Bible claims that everything started. My argument against that, because I watched Neil deGrasse Tyson on what was his the Cosmos. Yes,
Cosmos, yeah.
Watched him on the Cosmos, and he said that the way that they figured out how old the Earth was that they dug into this mountain, and it had these layers similar to like what a tree would have, and they could kind of count the lines in this mountain and figure out exactly the oldest mountain on Earth, right? They wanted to figure out how old it was, and once they figured out how old it was, they had a general idea of how old the Earth was. The problem with that is that when for Christians is that when God created the earth, he created it with trees already, with mountains already, with humans who were grown humans and animals that were grown animals. If you ask which came first, the chicken or the egg, Christians believe the chicken came first and then later had the egg. These are full grown beings all over the place, and therefore these mountains already had age to them. Adam and Eve, they weren't grown adults that looked like babies. They had age to them. They had size, and they maybe had, hair and wrinkles and all this stuff. It didn't just start on that day. Like, they were already grown at that point, and the same would be applied to a mountain. That I think, if you're gonna try to convince me that my religion got it wrong because this mountain is too old, I'd say that mountain was way older than one when it was first created. It was already hundreds of years old when it got there.
So just want to clear a couple things up. So you believe in a young earth. You're a young earth creationist, right?
I haven't actually, I couldn't tell you exactly how old it is. I couldn't even tell you how old Neil deGrasse Tyson said it was, or the actual amounts of years. But I haven't heard this term before.
So you just think the young earth creationists just believe the earth is young. Like, according to the Bible, they did, generations went backwards, and they believe it's somewhere from 6,000 to 10,000 years old. So you can still, there's tons of Christians that aren't young earth creationists. So if I first, try to debate a point that the earth isn't young, that has no bearing on, Christianity overall being wrong, just that specific thing that you're claiming is wrong.
But the problem, hold on. If they call the Bible the Holy Bible, they can't believe that any part of it is wrong. Now, I'm still doing my own research into that because I'm somewhat taking issue with parts here and there and wanting to figure out exactly how the entire Bible was constructed. And if you watch episode 1, we get into how the Bible was constructed and what the process was to that. And we'll get into it again in another podcast coming up. But that is one of my main issues. But for Christians, just speaking broadly, if they call it the Holy Bible, they have to believe that every word, every letter is exactly correct.
Right. Unless you believe it in a metaphorical sense. So, I guess it just depends whether you want to take it literally. And then if you want to take it literally, like you're saying, it makes sense to take all of it literally. Because it doesn't make sense to say you take it literally and then pick and choose the bits that you want to take literal. And
we would call them parables, and there's no exact, these are parables and these aren't. And I know Catholics believe that lots of the Bible is just parables, but
yeah.
But
I wanted to go back to the Big Bang. I just wanted to explain something real quick. So with theories, it's not like you just chose the model and just went with it. Once you have a theory set up and you have evidence backing it, you also do predictions and things to falsify it. And so you have predictions of what you should find if this were true. They did do that with the Big Bang Theory, and you have things like the composition of the hydrogen, helium, and lithium. And then you have the cosmic background radiation. So anyway, it's things like that solidified the theory into a scientific theory. And then there was something else I wanted to... Okay, so with the age of the Earth, would you say then that God created the Earth with fossils already in it?
No, I also don't believe that if it says God created the earth in 7 days, that it was an actual 7 days like we would believe in, because if we believe that God is not bound by time, then it would be totally different. And if you said, hey, look, it could have been the Big Bang Theory that just happened over time because God did make us intricate and he did make everything with a process, that this is the process that he started with. And that's just how it wound up. I would have no argument against that.
Yeah, and I know tons of Christians that believe that. They're like, they well, like, I guess, agree with the scientific processes from the Big Bang Theory and evolution, yet they still believe that it's God and he's kind of guiding certain things to happen, and that he made the Big Bang happen. So we don't know how, like, what came before the Big Bang. Obviously, we have no way of testing that. I mean, they can make predictions and stuff, but as of right now, there's no way to test that. So
which is the problem, though. That is the problem, is if you cannot test it, if you can't recreate it, if you can't do it again, or anything even remotely similar, then it, even on a smaller scale, it's no longer proof. It's just evidence of. It's just saying, hey, look, this is more evidence of this being true, but we don't actually have proof that it is true.
So in science and just life overall, you can't prove anything 100%. So you want to get near, as close as possible. You want to be like 99.9% sure of something. And that's what scientific theories are. It's a model with so much evidence that it has, like, it's a scientific consensus, and there's tons of evidence for it. So you can't recreate a Big Bang, but you can do things like at the Hadron Collider and test stuff like that. So you can see how particles, work, and how they work towards each other and with each other. And once again, you can falsify these theories. They're falsifiable, which is a big thing in a theory. What would make it wrong? What would prove it wrong? So let's try to find something that would prove it wrong. And so far, nothing. But we have not falsified it, but we have the correct predictions as well as the mathematical models that work. So,
but the fact that you can't create something from nothing is a proven theory that would falsify it.
Well, we that's not a theory. We don't know, because we don't know that there was nothing and then there was something. We're just assuming that. But then,
okay, so the name and the initial thought process of an actual Big Bang, starting off with just some sort of massive explosion that led to planets and life over time, is not an actual depiction of it's just called the Big Bang Theory because that's the theory that it started off with, but in reality, closer theories would say that there was something that it started off as.
Yeah, there was something. They say singularity. I think they're calling it something else now, and that became unstable. And I'm not a physicist, and I wish I could understand the physics, but that's like over my head. But expanded and created a few elements, and then from there you have cosmic evolution, which is billions of years. But what I would argue is that we may not know exactly what caused this to happen, or like what came before that. We used to say that about a lot of things. Like, we can't test that. We don't have the technology to do this. We can't do it. But technology does get better, and look what we're doing now. So you don't know what we're going to be able to do later. But as far as God, you're claiming that we don't know and we have no evidence and can't recreate it. So I can tell you, we don't know yet.
I'm saying you do have evidence. You just don't have proof.
What do you mean?
Saying you do have evidence. Look, if I want to say this person's guilty, I can bring in mountains of evidence to show that they're guilty. But I still, that doesn't mean just because I have evidence of them being guilty that they're actually guilty, or that I've even proven that they're guilty. It just means that I have stuff that makes it look like they are guilty. That's all evidence is something that makes it look like it's true. but it's called evidence and not proof because it's not proof. It just makes it look like it may be true.
I mean, you can call it proof if you want, but yeah, like I said, you can get to like 99.9% certainty, like with gravity. Like if you drop something, you know it's gonna fall, and you think that's like a fact, right? You think, and it's part of a theory, the gravitational theory, and you are 99% sure that that's gonna fall. Can you for sure say it's always gonna fall? No. So those theories work in the same way. You have all these facts that build this whole model up. So it's not just like we think this is it. You have facts backing everything, and you just build a model to explain how those facts came about.
I don't know. You ask a flat earther, they're
Yeah.
tell you there is no gravity. I
Yes.
would love to find a flat earther, man. You know somebody, please point them in my
I
direction.
do, and I'm sure you'd love to talk to them, and I would love to like pin somebody down and get some actual answers, but
Yes, I have not, like, all I see are little clips here and there, like YouTube videos and Facebook videos of somebody pouring water on a bowl or popping a balloon or all sorts of weird stuff. And I'm like, yeah, but if I could actually ask you some questions right after you do this, you would have absolutely no answer for it. You're just showing evidence again. You're not showing any proof whatsoever.
I've talked to a bunch of not a bunch, but I mean about 5 flat earthers, and they all kind of seem to have the same misconceptions of science. So they've never actually studied science or anything. They've What I've gotten from them specifically was just YouTube videos and random like websites saying like, no, this isn't how it works. Nope, the scientists are wrong, but they have no actual evidence of anything or proof of anything.
I believe in science, and I know that there are some crazy Christians out there who want to believe that it is God versus science at all costs. And I believe that the more science we have and the more we find out how intricate we are, the more beautiful God's design is for us or of us. And I find you a very objective person, and I disagree with you on lots of things. And most of those things will probably start off with that basis of me being a Christian and you being an atheist. And that's normally probably where we start off at, for most things. I appreciate scientific proof, and I like science and I enjoy it, which is why I watch things like the Cosmos. And I may not believe everything that he says, or I feel like there's more out there or more questions than what they're answering. But with if you are being objective, I know that you don't like the whole snowflake uh, sort of movement that's taking over, and you don't like these general statements that are being put out there. And I think that more so, especially in the news, and that may not mean that it's everybody, but a huge generalization is being made about the LGBTQ because of what does show up on CNN and what does show up on Fox from these, more fanatics that are coming out with these crazy and very strong stances for or against numerous things. And I'd like to know what your thoughts are on some of the things that are coming out. We can get more specific as well.
Yeah, so I am gay and I am engaged to a woman, and I've always been really outspoken as well on this because it's really hard. There's a lot of bullying, there's a lot of stigma. I couldn't come out to my family at all until a little over 3 years ago when I finally came. My mom's known since I was 14, and she said, your dad would die. You cannot say anything. You have to date men. That's how it's supposed to be. Women being with women is not natural. And her being a biologist, I was always like, what are you talking about? But I let it go. because I just always wanted to make my parents happy. So I did what they wanted me to do, and I dated men, and I was miserable. It was like, yes, I'm okay, life is okay, but it's like you just felt like something's always missing and you don't know what it is. And then you start wondering what is actually wrong with you. You think like you're doing something wrong, or you're like something is wrong with your being. So it just breaks my heart to see all these people going through that. My parents, thankfully, are amazing people, and they had a hard time with it at first, but they love me, and they said, you know, we love you. We may not agree with it, but we're gonna support you, and we're gonna support whatever makes you happy. So it's really heartbreaking to see all these families disowning their kids, or kids being beat up, or just it's just terrible. That's
Well, and I think that's where a lot of it starts out with, is especially for the LGBT community, is that they spend so much time defending themselves that they start coming up with these very extreme notions to where it's this or nothing else. And I remember I was sitting with somebody who I believe was a guy. I didn't actually ask, but was dressed as a woman and had a female name, um and said something like, "Oh, I don't mind Christians so much, but I hate any Republicans. All Republicans are horrible and they should die." And I was like, let's move the conversation on somewhere else real quick, because that's where a lot of these conversations are heading, and it makes a very, like, me versus you, my side or your side sort of stance. My sister is gay, and I can tell you that for anybody else who is, I what do you call them, normies, or
I don't even get into any of that
the whole
stuff.
there's what was the other one, cisgender,
Right, yeah.
okay, so for anybody who's cisgender, it is also hard to comprehend, and it's hard to understand if you're not the one having those feelings. It is hard to kind of deal with on a personal level, and it starts to change your thought or your image of that person, and you have to kind of wind it back and realize, like, oh wait, this is my sister. I still love her. Everything's still the same. I don't want to know about her sexual life if she's dating a guy. Why do I want to know about it if she's dating a woman? I wouldn't want that information one way or the other. But even my own process started with, seems unnatural. It's, you can't have kids. There's no procreation, which is kind of the point in having different genders. Then it seems unnatural. And then on top of that, then I start, again, evidence that isn't proof but just starts to build a case for me. I see most gay men are super dramatic and super loud and out there and running around with rainbow flags and everything and doing crazy stuff in parades and just super flamboyant. And I start thinking, okay, like, this is way over the top, really dramatic. What's the most dramatic thing you could possibly think of outside of committing suicide? Would be telling your parents that you're gay and telling everybody around you, hey, I'm gay. And so I started to theorize, okay, maybe these people are just super dramatic and that's where it comes from, and it just leads to this. But then you start to notice that even at super young ages, kids are just different, and they I saw this documentary once about, I think it was called Do I Sound Gay or something like that. And it was a bunch of guys talking about how they didn't realize that they sounded the way they did and that they were gay. It had the guy from I'm blanking again. The runway show where he's always talking like this. Hey guys, great.
Paul or something.
Yeah, sure. So he's on there. Yeah, there's a bunch of gay celebrities, and they're all talking about how they had no clue how flamboyant they actually sounded, and they hated their voices, and so they sounded whiny. And they don't actually get to the bottom of anything or come out with it. But at young ages, kids already talk with those voices, and then grow up to be gay and come out as gay, and that started to make me think like, okay, this is obviously like a very young set in thing. And if I'm I'm questioning whether or not somebody is born this way, this is more evidence leading the other way that I think that, it's very plausible. And I don't debate it and I don't think about it much. But it's, it's something that, again, for somebody who does not go through that process, it's going to be hard for them to understand. And some of them become very radicalized against it because it's hard to understand. And others, like me, are caught somewhere in the middle where they're not too worried about it one way or the other. They're gonna, they're not gonna hate anybody, and they're gonna, love the people they love regardless of whether they're gay or not. And then other people, maybe they are totally enlightened and understand it better than anyone else, and don't happen to be gay or bisexual either. But
What I like to, because I get questions from a bunch of people, and they're like, well, did you choose? Like, when did you know? And did you decide? And I try to frame it in a way that they can understand it. So, like, I would.
Well, for women, it did always seem like it was just a smart decision. If you see guys, you're like, okay, look, you can either have this guy over here in this picture, or you can have that over there. Which one is more attractive to you? Which one makes more sense to you? Or which one do you have more in common with? It just seemed like a smarter decision. Guys confused me a little bit more than women did. But if you're, but if it's not a decision at all, then that totally changes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would ask, like, did you have a moment where you sat down and you had to choose, like, should I go for men or should I go for women? And you were like, I'm going to go for women. Did you do that?
No.
Okay. It's the same for us. We didn't, like, actively make a decision. That's just what we were always attracted to. Just like you knew you were attracted to women, so was I. So I try to frame it in a way that they can understand that, like, it wasn't an active choice. It's just how we felt the entire time. And then some people, it takes longer for some people because of certain stuff that may be going on in their life to be able to come out. And some people hide it forever, So I think it sucks that people get, like, to an extremist point with it, because you do nothing for the movement when you do that. Because then you become, like, just a caricature of what we're trying to portray. So I just think we all need to respect each other and respect others' decisions. Like, even if I disagree with something, if you want me to call you this, okay, that's fine. I'll call you she if you tell me to. That's, just basic respect for each other, I think, would get us a long way.
Agreed. I think that if you are a Christian and you believe in what the Bible says and you want to practice it, then compassion and love and respect are our main points in there. And you don't have to agree with the person's lifestyle in order to be respectful. You don't have to. Lots of people's immediate argument is, well, the Bible says not to change for the world and not to, be one with the world, but to be, a soldier in his army. And that doesn't mean that you always have to be combative towards everybody, loving the sinner and hating the sin, or, loving your neighbor, or, trying to, you're not going to, especially same with both sides. You're not going to convert anybody's beliefs by telling them how dumb they are and how ignorant they are, and trying to pound this idea into their head that they're somehow an idiot and could not possibly understand that's just I don't know how many people that's actually worked for, but it's probably a very small amount.
I agree. I agree. And it, um, obviously, once again, I hate blanket statements. So when I say some Christians, not all of them.
Sure.
It's a specific people. Like you said, they say like, well, the Bible's against homosexuality, so cool. Don't be gay then, or don't have any homosexual relationships. But when you try to push that onto other people, that's where the problem is. So same with any religion. If your specific religion tells you to do this, awesome. I'm all for your right to do that. I agree. As long as you are not trying to tell me that I have to do the same with you. So,
Then,
yes.
but you come into these issues now where there are still people who are Christians and are also gay. And now you have like the bakery issue where a guy wants to be able to say, hey, look, this is my religious belief and I should be able to stand up for that. And then a gay couple saying, hey, look, if I come in as a customer, you have to serve me or else you're going back to Jim Crow laws and trying to decide based off of discriminating, factors, whether or not you're going to give me what I asked for. I think it's bad business, but I also, I don't know, because when it comes to religion, I do find it a little bit harder to argue against it. If your religious belief says that you shouldn't, again, I don't think that if you're a Christian that means that you have to stop selling to people who disagree with your beliefs. That's just bad business. But if this guy does believe that he has to stand his ground as a Christian or should not support in any way a Christian or a gay wedding, then I have trouble arguing one way or the other. I really do. I have trouble finding one side correct.
Would you say, let's say that I am a certain religion and we view a certain race as it's troubling. You want nothing to do with them. Would you say that it's okay because of the religious belief for them to deny service to, let's say, a black person?
Whether or not I'd say it's okay, no, I would not say it's okay. Whether or not I would stand there and demand that they give me a cake is a different story. I'm going to another bakery.
Yeah, and some people do that. They're like, well, I don't want to give them my money. I think the problem is that, like, that shouldn't even be happening. Like, I shouldn't be denied service based on something that I cannot help, based on who I am. So hence why you have all these anti-discrimination laws, which are now, it's now an issue because of some freedom of religion bills. But I personally, it's not that I would want to give them my money. It's more that I shouldn't have to go through that. Like, you shouldn't be able to deny me service because of your religious belief. Because at the end of the day, what does the Bible say on homosexuality? That you shouldn't lay with another man, and that homosexuality, I forget how it's exactly worded, but we'll just say homosexuality is a sin. You can't defend that with your religion and say that it tells you that you cannot serve me or perform a service or something like that. So I would think it would have to be a very specific thing if I were to agree that you can get away with that because of your freedom of religion.
I understand that these people live here, but if I was to go into the Middle East and
Yes.
they said, hey, look, you're a Christian, I don't want to serve you.
Yeah.
I would actually understand. I would, but I'm not forced to live there. I eventually come back home and it's totally different. But if you want to go a little bit deeper with this, then to turn around and have somebody who is gay demand that they be in a leadership role within the church, in a church that believes that what you're doing is a sin, would be a little bit backwards. We all believe that we're sinning anyways, whether you're the pastor or the pope. We still believe that you're a sinner and that you're living in sin. But to promote your sin, to say, I am proud of my sin. I sinned today and I will do it tomorrow and the next day as well. That's where it becomes a little bit harder again to side with one side or the other.
I can understand that. And I think if you're like a nonprofit, then I think, okay, I'll kind of respect that. With private businesses, I don't know that I would give that type of respect to. But yeah, and it's really shocking to me. I don't know if it's because I'm atheist or I don't know, but it's really shocking to me to see people who are gay go to these churches who very like loudly oppose homosexuality. So it's just shocking to me. Like, these people hate you and you still are clinging on to this specific belief. So it's just, I guess it's just hard for me to understand why you would like believe something that just it's so hateful towards you.
I would understand if you tell me that you believe this is somehow a civil rights movement that you are a part of. I'm trying to become part of this church as a gay person to move forward the line, to move the line a little bit farther, like the sit-ins at the at the cafeterias or in the restaurants where Black people would go and sit there, even though they knew those people did not want to serve them and they didn't want them in there anyways. They went and sat there because they felt like that was the only way to move the line, move the bar a little bit more forward. And so I understand that. But when it comes to a religious belief, if you believe that there is nothing wrong with this, why be a part of a church that does believe that there is something wrong with it? And churches are now being discriminated towards because they do not allow gay weddings or things like that in their churches. And actually, there were laws that were initially built, like no taxing churches or tax cuts for religious places, because they don't want the government to somehow find a religion and say, we're going to find ways to tear you down and cost you money and make you disappear because you won't have enough money to stick around. And now churches that are refusing to I'm not sure, and while we talk about this, I'd like to actually look up the exact state, because I believe there is a state that is saying that if you do not allow gay weddings in your churches, we will take away your tax exemptions for religious beliefs or religious places and start to give you higher tax rates for it, which will eventually put them out of business. So it does the exact opposite of what it was meant to do.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I agree with that. That's I don't think I agree with that. I'd have to see exactly what it says, but yeah, if it's a nonprofit, I mean, I don't know how you can ask a church to marry you when they're very against certain sins. It's like if I'm committing incest or something like that and coming to the church and being like, you have to marry me, even though that's a sin in their eyes. I just don't know how that would even work.
Okay, so here it is. It says the Supreme Court same-sex marriage ruling impact on churches. So right here, let's see. In light of the two recent Supreme Court rulings on the same-sex marriage, questions have arisen as to the impact for churches and pastors. For instance, some are wondering if they will be exposed to liability for refusing to marry a same-sex couple if their church happens to be located in one of the 13 currently allowing such marriages. Those states include California, Connecticut, Delaware, blah, blah, blah.
That's a little out of date, but
Is it?
I mean, it's legal everywhere now, but I want to see what it says about the specifically if people want to marry in the church.
It says, one, it invaded the province of state and local government to make regulations about marriage. It violated Article 5 of the Constitution, which incorporates the concept of equal protection of the laws. You know, initially, we were built to have different countries, in theory, that had their own laws, but acted together, right? It was a bunch of different states. Different countries are called states as well. And you have all these different states that acted as one united country. And to start, the more federal laws you put out, the more you take away from that initial belief of having separate laws and separate places where you live, to where if you want to live in the United States, there's the Bill of Rights that all of them have to abide by, but different rules for different states means that you can move, not too far away and still and just have different laws in a different place. So this Proposition 8 in the state of California was started in 2008 as voter initiative to decide that marriage should be defined as between a man and a woman. Okay, sorry. I guess that's not what I'm looking for.
So I think with federal laws and state laws, I understand states having their specific laws, but I think with equality, with things like the Civil Rights Act and stuff like that, it should be made federal. So with something like, the marriage.
Because it's a matter of freedom.
Yes. So as far as like a woman marrying a woman, absolutely should be federal because it's about equal rights. For people. So
what do you say to the argument, though, that if you just called it something other than marriage, then that would change the view on it? You still get all the same tax claiming and the benefits with healthcare and all those things, but instead of calling it marriage, you call it a union or a partnership. Or
I would say that the word marriage isn't like a strictly a Christian word. So it's just a union. So I think it should be between a man and a man, a woman and a woman, a man and a woman. I disagree with calling it something else because it's still not. I guess it's like equality, but not really. When historically, like, it's not just between a man and a woman.
Okay, so actually, this is what I was talking about. Mm-hmm. I found the article. What it is it's a school, a college called Bob Jones. And if you are aware of the Christian colleges around here, Bob Jones is known as the most strict Christian school there is anywhere. I mean, they believe that you can't dance. They have rules on your hair and your facial hair. They have rules on women wearing pants. They have rules on everything you could imagine that would separate one sex from the other. And that's the way it has always been. They didn't just start coming up with this stuff as of recently. It has been that way forever. This is Justice Alito said, well, in the Bob Jones case, the court held that college held that a college was not entitled to tax-exempt status if it opposed interracial marriage or interracial dating. So would the same apply to a university or a college if it opposed same-sex marriage? Generally, let's see, General Verrilli, I don't think I can answer that question without knowing more specifics, but it's certainly going to be an issue. I don't deny that, Justice Alito. It is going to be an issue.
So I would agree with the interracial thing because, if we're specifically speaking about, is it a Christian college?
Yes.
About interracial marriage, I don't think it says
that was I believe that was a much older issue.
Yeah. So I'm saying, so I understand why that's not okay because your religion doesn't specifically say anything about interracial marriage. Mm-hmm. So when you are sitting there doing something like that, you're just straight up discriminating. With homosexuality, I can understand why you wouldn't want to in a church because you believe that it's a sin. Just like I said, just if it was in incestual marriage, the church would probably be like, no, I don't want to marry you because it's a sin. So,
and there are churches out there that will do it. And so for you to insist on a specific church, and maybe you have a reason. Maybe your parents got married in that church. Maybe,
right.
Maybe that's where you met. Maybe there are, real reasons to why you pick that church over others. But to make it an issue to where you refuse to switch to another church that would support you. Look, it's different. I understand. I'm not going to have trouble finding a church that would marry a man and a woman. But if I happen to go to a church that says, no, I'm sorry, we actually only believe in gay marriage and nothing else, I'd be like, okay, well, fine. I don't want to get married here then anyways. Yeah. If you don't want me to get married here, then I don't want to get married here.
Yeah.
But I think that, again, with all of these, it's become more of an issue of where they feel like they need to move the bar as a social justice issue, instead of it being something personal for them. And I think that we're not all the way there yet, but I think in today's age, you should be able to have options, and if some options don't pan out, you go to those other options. Everybody is not perfect just yet, but we have come a long way.
Yes.
You are going to have options. You're going to have other people out there that support you, and that will help you along the way for whatever it is that you're trying to find.
Yeah, I think it just says more about, I guess, the people. I understand that you think it's a sin. I guess it just says more about you as a person if you can't empathize at all with them. But those are, I don't think that's a big I think that's a small subset of Christians as a whole. And they're kind of moving towards like a more non-denominational thing. And Unitarian churches and stuff like that, where it's inclusive of everybody. So it makes me happy to see that, because even though I don't go, it makes me happy to see that other people can go no matter what their orientation or identity is.
We got a little bit of time left, and then we'll wrap it up. I know you posted something on Facebook recently about, and I don't want to misquote it, but as close as I can get. I wish I could walk down the road and live in a country where I wouldn't pass idiots that hadn't been, raised in our current educational system or something similar.
Yeah, it's something about walk down the street and not hear idiocy going on all around me, because I think the main issue, and nobody's perfect. There's no perfect country, and obviously I can't just go somewhere where people aren't going to make comments that don't make sense. That's just illogical. But I think what bothers me about this country a lot is that we have the money to educate the population, and yet we don't fund education correctly, and it's showing. And we were top of everything, science, technology, everything. That's all now moving away to Europe. So, you have over half the population thinking like just insane things about science, and even basic science and math, and they can't even answer that. So it's just really sad to see in a country that is so rich and has the resources to do it that
But
we don't do it.
is that really the fault of the country, or is that the fault of the person? You and I were both educated by this system, and we probably were in a better area than some have, the option of being in. But we were both educated by the same system, and we're not geniuses by any means, but we chose to. I dropped out of school. I have a ninth grade education, and I still choose to continue learning and still choose to continue researching and finding things as much as I possibly can. And that, I try to learn other languages, and I try to learn as much about science and other things as I possibly can. And that's what I choose to do. And I do all of those things without any cost to myself. I can go to a library, I can look it up online, I have endless amounts of ways to learn things outside of just going to school. But if you did go to school, you got a lot of education there, and I see no fault with it. I don't want to argue on whether or not it's funded correctly, because as far as the government goes, I think we could do without a lot of it and maybe give that to teachers. But I think that there's not idiots everywhere because our educational system is at fault. I think people choose not to learn and choose not to push themselves, and that's the result of it in the end.
Yeah, and the reality though is that most people don't have, maybe not that they don't have the drive, they were never taught it. So me specifically, and I don't know about your family life or anything, my parents pushed education being important to me. So outside of school, I always did everything I could, and I did school as well. But this country started doing standardized testings, and it became this ordeal about just memorizing stuff and sticking to a specific curriculum, and teachers being like not having enough time to teach certain subjects. So it became more about like teaching you what you're supposed to memorize as opposed to teaching you how to think. And I think that's very important. But like you said, different areas are funded differently. They have different family lives. They have different resources.
What do you mean how to think, though? Because for lots of people, our system works out great. And then they also have lots of sub projects or sub classes that you can go to for learning disabilities and things like that, and different ways of learning, more interactive ways of learning. My mom's a teacher. They use computers all the time now, and they use projectors, and they use tablets and all sorts of different things to really help get the kid interested and pay attention. And this is this is different. It's a different kind of school. But my point is that all schools have these resource classes where they can help the kids who choose to, or their parents choose to help them. And I think the issue lies with parents in this country. I think that it is not the job of a teacher to raise your child to understand the belief or the understanding of education, or the necessity for it. And you even started by saying that your parents made sure that it was a priority in your life. And that is where it starts. It starts at home, it starts with the parents, and that is where the issue is. And even more, to go even further with it, everybody wants to push this idea, and it's more common on the left, that everybody is the same, everybody's equal, we're all just as talented and just as smart and just as special. And it's not true. Sometimes you have to get a little bit more help, and sometimes you have to get a little bit more attention. And I think that the issue lies with this idea that if you play on a team, doesn't matter what your record is, you should win a trophy at the end, just like the champions did. That's where the issue is.
I would never say everybody's like equal. You have equal rights, but nobody's equal. We all have our strengths. We all have our weaknesses. And I think that that's important to remember, that you want to give people the opportunity to do better. And this country, I'm not saying it's like terrible and they have terrible, like no education or anything like that. What I'm saying is that from where we were, like leading everything, it's amazing to me to see us lagging behind European countries now in education, science, and technology. So, and you go to inner cities and you think they're funded, but they are lacking a lot of resources, and it's terrible. And like you said, yes, it starts at home. Not everybody has been raised the same way, and that's cyclical. And then it goes on to the next generation, and then they're taught the same things, and then the next generation. So it's about trying to educate everybody, because yeah, you may have had some opportunities. I may have had certain opportunities. Certain people haven't, and their parents haven't, and they've grown up differently and with different points of views and beliefs and perceptions. So, and once again, the resources. Some schools have awesome resources. A lot of schools do not. So
the inner cities aren't well funded, but the families and the people living in the inner cities do not value education as highly as they should. And to fund them pointlessly for only a few to actually take advantage of that, I'm not saying that they're not worth it, but I am saying that if you are in a gang culture where you're going to build these very nice buildings and have all of this stuff that's going to get broken into, going to get stolen, going to get vandalized, and then for everybody to just cut class and go do other things. I know that I was born in New York. I was one of two white kids in my entire class, and I went to school in New Jersey because the schools around my area were dangerous. And that that had me grow up totally differently with a different thought process. But then going and spending a lot of time in Atlanta, and as I got older, just kind of reminded me, like, hey, there are all of these schools where people don't respect them, they don't take advantage of them, and on top of that, the people who are in that area not only don't respect them, but devalue others who do take advantage of the education that they could possibly get, where you're going to be called an Uncle Tom, you're going to be called some smarty pants, you're going to be bullied and shunned by your community if you end up becoming a smart person or a bookworm.
I think that's why it's so important, because you have to start trying to teach people a different perception, that education, being educated, is going to help, that teaching them how to make better life decisions. So it's not just about like going to a classroom, but also funding programs. I don't know if you've ever like read the stories from people that do like after school programs, or they open up their own like sports programs and stuff, and how it affects the people that are living there, because you're showing them that there's a different way. And that's what I'm saying, like, I think it's so important to fund education, because you want an educated population. That's how you get better better technology, better economic system, better science, better medical, like everything. So my point was that we are a very rich country, and we choose to spend most of our money on defense and other stuff that is probably not necessary, as opposed to making sure that our population is well educated. So again, not that we're not, because we are an educated country, but from going to a leading country to lagging behind other countries, it's amazing to see.
So what happened? Did other countries just get better? Did we get worse? What changed? Because we have more schools, we have more students, and we have more funding than we ever have. So what changed over time?
They did start defunding schools. It might be more money because it's more people. So obviously that's going to increase, but they've been, for the amount of people we have, they've defunded the educational system. Like now you have classes where it's like 45 students and one teacher, and they're taking away money from programs like music programs or art programs. But I don't think that's the only issue. You have other issues. For example, they were wanting to do the Hadron Collider here in the United States, and Congress voted not to do it.
What is that?
The Large Hadron Collider that's in Europe. What's the other name for it? CERN. It's a big machine that sends particles, subatomic particles, at super fast speeds.
Okay.
Anyway, it's in Europe, and it's a huge physics. You can look up CERN, CERN, and it'll pop up what are you doing? International.
So yeah, if anybody who's just listening, pulled up the United States scores compared to other countries. Though I don't really understand this graph. Internationally, U.S. stands in the middle of the pack on science, math, reading scores. But it doesn't show which other countries are actually ahead of us. It does show us in the middle of the pack, but not necessarily.
Yeah, you have in Germany, you have the Planck Institute. So you have the Large Hadron Collider over there. But they try to do it here, I believe in Texas, I'm not sure, and Congress voted against it. And then you have a bunch of other science issues that have become more of religious issues with certain religious groups.
What did you call it? A CERN?
CERN, just put CERN.
Oh, okay.
And it should pop up. Maybe. There it is.
Is that it?
Yep.
The European Organization for Nuclear Research is one of the world's largest and most respected centers for centuries for scientific research.
So anyway, we were going to have that here, but we ended up not having it because people thought it was going to create a black hole and then it was going to destroy us. So
going to create a black hole.
Yeah, apparently. So we didn't, and now all of that research went over to Europe. So we're just kind of lagging behind on certain things like, oh God, no. I can't think. Stem cell research, evolution, certain physics stuff like the Big Bang Theory, because there's been a lot of opposition from.
Yes, I was about to say that's not so much a funding issue as much it is the disagreement on whether or not it's necessary or even factually correct. I think we can, as far as science goes, we could probably agree on global warming.
Yes.
And but evolution, the Big Bang, not so much.
Why not evolution?
Because again, I don't see actual proof. I can see evidence or proof of other species similar to us, and with similar DNA. Whether or not that's where we came from is another story. And it was again a theory, just a random theory that was eventually proved or proven.
You start with a hypothesis. You create a theory from that. But once it becomes a scientific theory, I was telling you earlier, you have bits and pieces of facts. And you have all these facts together, and you set up a model of how these facts actually work and come together. And that's what a theory is in science. It's like the highest degree of knowledge you can achieve. So the theory of evolution has, I would say, just mountains of evidence, probably more than any other theory. I can't really think of too many others that have as much evidence. But yeah, you have DNA, you have fossils, but like the DNA alone shows how closely related we are, and certain changes that have happened when species diverge from each other.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I guess that's one thing, is the European countries have also become less religious, and we have a lot of opposition from religious groups to a lot of science. And I think that that's a big issue as well, because you're kind of halting progress.
Sure. Yeah. Again, for education, the issue for me will start with the parents. My kid comes home and is failing in their school. I'm not going to think it's because they weren't taught those things, or if their grades or their test scores are lagging. I'm not going to think it's because the teachers suck. I'm going to believe that my child and I, as their parent, are doing something wrong. And I see your points on specific parts of study and research that are not being taught or we're not participating in. I wouldn't say that again, with the initial post that we go back to, with people who are ignorant or idiots walking around, not knowing simple facts. Those simple facts were definitely, they were given the opportunity to learn them at some point, and they just didn't take advantage of it. And that's, again, an issue with the family and the household and where they come from.
I just want to give a quick example. Let's say that you're not a biology teacher as a parent, and your child has biology class, and they go to it, and you're assuming that they're learning what they're supposed to learn, right? And they're passing and everything's fine. For example, my teacher, who passed away, and I loved him dearly, but when it was time to learn about evolution, which is the basis of all biology, he said, "I'm not going to teach evolution because I don't believe a monkey gave birth to a human." And I sat there just my mind blown, because I'd already learned about all this, specifically also from my parents, because they're biologists and chemists. And I sat there like, that's not what evolution is. And he was like, that is what it is, and we're not going to talk about it. I refuse to teach it. So you skipped an entire section, which is literally the basis of all living things. The entire class. And I didn't have a test on it. I didn't do anything on it. So me specifically, I was lucky to have parents that were biologists, but
Right.
as a regular student, you're like, oh, okay, cool. I'm not going to do it. And you never learned any of it.
Mhm.
And you as a parent don't know because they passed everything they were supposed to pass. The teacher supposedly taught them what they were supposed to teach them. You're not a biologist. You don't know. So it's issues like that as well with funding also because not that specific example, but you have a teacher teaching 45 students and it does affect how you teach people. You can't have like one-on-ones as much. So anyway, it's a bunch of different issues that are, that are affecting, I would say, the educational level of people. Once again, we're not like at the bottom or have terrible literacy or anything like that. But I believe we're like above Turkey on evolution questions, which doesn't really say much. So
I was about to say you can find somebody. Uh,
yeah.
yeah. Well, did we cover everything?
I think so.
Are we missing anything?
um, I don't know if you had any other things you wanted to talk about.
Well, if I think of something, then I'll give you a call and we'll have you back on again.
Yeah, just let me know.
I appreciate you coming on, Kat. I think it has been great conversation, and I hope to get you back on again in the future.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thank you so much for including me.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Tom Flory, and we'll see you guys later.
Bye.